Hello there, Steve here. Yeah, I wanted to talk about Tom Crawford's eviction case. For those who are not familiar with the Tom Crawford case, Tom Crawford's a man, 64 I think. I only know so rough details, so don't take my word for it on any of this. It's what I've seen on videos, and I've made up my own mind about things and looked at what other people have had to say. And I just, something just doesn't make sense. I think other people are getting this feeling that, with the whole case, the way it's been developing over the years, it just seems something's doesn't add up, The Tom Crawford case, yeah, basically 25 years or so ago, he bought a house and mortgaged it with Bradford and Bingley Bank and paid the mortgage every month. The fact that he still lived in the house after 25 years is proof in itself that I'd say that the payments went through for the house. But what happened is apparently the bank, Bradford and Bingley in this case, when they made the initial mortgage agreement, in that agreement was the buyer signs over the power of attorney to the bank, to the company, to the mortgager. That basically means what power of attorney is like if we're going to make some legal decisions, changes in the contract, you're giving the party power to do that. But power of attorney, it kind of means power to work the law. You have to have a certain qualification to work law because it works off its own language and that. It's not just you don't just come in with your own version of it. So power of attorney is about having the competence to change the law. So initially the insurance, as I understand the story, the mortgage was an endowment policy mortgage, and it was changed through this power of attorney clause in the contract to an interest only mortgage, which means that the house isn't paid, it's just you're only paying interest on the house, So 25 years down the line, the mortgage company come to him and, the Bradford and Bingley say that, you still haven't paid for the house yet, when Tom's been paying for it every month since he started, So the bailiffs come round, yeah. Okay, so we come back to the present day. The bailiffs come round, or say they're coming round, and Tom Crawford puts out a YouTube video appealing to viewers to maybe to come to his house as witnesses, just to stand there, to be witness to this, so that the peace is upheld, And on that first meeting, I think 300 or 400 people gathered at Tom's house to stop the bailiffs coming, and obviously they saw the amount of people and didn't come, so they had to get a new warrant and come back on another date. So they chose another date. Yet again, Tom put out an appeal and the people came on that date, and this time there was more than 600 people. And so this is going on, it's kind of difficult for the bailiffs to evict Tom and carry out the policy of the paperwork, the agreement, the mortgage agreement, the contract between Tom Crawford and Bradford and Bingley. So here, we see the police on the side of the bailiffs, the police on the side of the courts and the judge's decision is final, and there's nothing we can do, there's nothing Tom can do, there's nothing nobody. That's the way it feels, Then we've got this strange atmosphere going on in the forums and things. The other day I read a letter saying, well done Tom Crawford, I stopped paying my mortgage in solidarity and now I've lost my house. And it was obviously an ironic, cynical statement to make from somebody who, thinks that Tom Crawford's basically just trying to avoid paying mortgage, just trying to avoid paying his bills, And so there's a lot of people coming in and writing comments, if you want a house, pay for it, and things like that, not taking into consideration that maybe somebody made a mistake on the paper somewhere. And that person's maybe gone a long time ago, and that little paper mistake, that little error that's happened on the paper is now floating round. But you see, while we're busy creating allegations against each other for who's to blame, anything other than a little error on the paper, or a misunderstanding in the contract. We'll talk about the 5 C's, the 5 laws, the 5 C's of contracting, later or another video. But if all 5 points of a contract are not met by both parties, then that contract is from day one all the way through invalid. But at this point, we see Tom Crawford fighting the case, looking at the paperwork, getting connected to others. There's others, trying to help him with the paperwork, looking at the paperwork, noticing that the paperwork from the bailiffs has got no signed, sealed judge's signature on it, and that they're saying that the police are now working fraudulently, facilitating corporations, not upholding the peace. I'm thinking, what's going wrong here? What's going wrong here? For starters, I think the police are not there to keep the peace; they're to enforce policy. It's a man. It's in the mind of a man what we call peace. For one man's peace is different to another man's peace, and so for me to actually judge would mean that I would be, I'd be judging, and a policeman isn't there to judge; he's there to uphold the law. Now, normally, all of those things that keep the peace, like not harming anybody, not stealing, not, all of these legislative things that are actually just common sense are written into law so that those policy enforcers can enforce what seems to us as being a humanitarian policy, keeping the peace, when it isn't. The police are not actually keeping the peace, they're following policy, following orders. It's probably good that way, because if the police and their own constabularies, their own little businesses are going to take their own control, they could really misuse the power. So police are there to enforce policy. So obviously, if there was no police, people wouldn't honour these pieces of paper. They wouldn't honour their promises. People are good-hearted, but sometimes when they get into pressure, they don't honour a promise. That's why promises have been transferred onto paper in the form of money, value promises, performance promises, the promise of of property and energy, and so these promises have to be kept. So they have to be kept on paper, and they have to, in order that that paper is taken seriously with people's life and death, that they make a life and death promise. Not always life and death, obviously, if it's over something small, but that kind of promise has to be made, put onto paper, and then enforced by police to enforce policy, to keep the polis going. The state, the city-state, the rule of law. So it's not about that's the thing. These people are not there to stop violence. It's just that violence is written into the legislation, so they will stop it. The other thing is that people are not really getting the concept that there are 2 kinds of sides to the law. There's the paper side, contracting, agreements between man, and then there's the criminal side, the natural side, hurting, stealing, pain, things like that. Now, in order to give people the aspirations, to give people the confidence to do business, to remove the risk from business, they had to create devices like money, like promissory notes, like insurances. A lot of these things came in with the maritime, within the shipping, because if one sailor would cargo $1 million worth of cargo, it would be too big a risk. It would be life and death to go sailing across the sea. So sailors didn't want to take that risk, and so they didn't. And then trading slows down because no one's taking a risk. In order to share that risk out, we share that onto the paper in the form of policies, legislation, money, promissory notes, all of this thing. We put that risk in that big thing, so that if something goes wrong with that trade system, that it doesn't hurt the human system, because we've put trust into that body of law that's run by a concept. It's like a ship. We've put our fellowship into that. We've put our energy into that ship and our trust in that ship. So it should give us that back in times where there's something gone wrong. You know, where the paper, where there's, you know, like say, like if somebody falls into bad times and can't fulfill a promise, it's not because they don't want to fulfill a promise, and they shouldn't be punished twice for falling into bad times. So that means as humans, as a human family, we're there to help our brothers and sisters. It's not a matter of pointing finger on people and saying, if you want a house, you should pay. Every man for himself, because it's not every man for himself. You know, we are a society, and that even me, somebody who regards myself as not like more of an anarchist who doesn't like to take part in the society, understands the necessity for agreeing with it, finding some relationship with that society. So if I'm going to give that society credence, use its money, use its laws, I want a little bit of like something coming back. And those people who are enforcing that, mainly like magistrates, judges, high court judges, legislators, those types of people should be looking out for the people's best interest. So at this point, why isn't Tom getting a fair hearing? Is he getting a fair hearing? I don't know. This is a presumption I'm making because of what I see. Surely the case isn't about whether the the mortgage agreement was changed without him knowing, or fraudulently, or whatever you might call it. It's not about the paperwork, it's not about the money, it's not about the legislation, it's not about the corruption in courts or the like heavy-handed bailiffs, it's not about the policemen not upholding the peace. It's about the claim. The claim is that everybody's acting fraudulently, everybody's like in cahoots with each other, everybody's like a conspiracy, when maybe there's something more. There has to be more. There has to be more. Otherwise we're just piously believing that everything is just built by Satan, built by evil. So there's more. And in my opinion, the claim needs to be that about fairness. Do you remember fairness? Equity. You know, equity used to be the other half of law. You used to get law and equity. And equity was fairness. So law was written rules, and fairness was a judgment that would be made based on mercy. You know, okay, back to the Tom Crawford situation. He's standing there 25 years later, paid the agreed amount for the house as it was valued back then. The house hasn't really like doubled in value probably. You know, we can see through fair, equitable eyes that the man has paid paid enough. Even though he was maybe foolish to overlook the contract, but he's not a lawyer. He's not expected to be a lawyer. He's probably got another job that he's paying for that mortgage with. We can't all be lawyers. So the law isn't for us to practice. We shouldn't really be going into a courtroom and questioning their system on any level. Now, I don't know anything about, like, you know, court procedures, but I know that, like, it's their procedures. It's their procedures, and it's very cryptical, and not one single lawyer is going to know everything about everything. It's compartmentalised, and it's a system that's been provided. Now we either have faith in that system in order to see it clearly, or we just get angry with it and lose. But I think in that situation we're talking about with Tom Crawford, it's completely got off the rails. It's more about like the fraudulent system and frauds and corruption and what the police are not doing and what the bailiffs are doing wrong, what everybody else is doing wrong when they're just following the paper that was provided for us. Now, are we getting the right remedy? You know, we're kind of saying that they're all getting it wrong because they're obeying paper. But in a society like this, we need to obey paper. Otherwise, we'd have probably never had the money. We wouldn't have had the money, because money is given to us by the, you know, by the sovereign, or the, you know, by the nation. It is printed and given to us. So on one hand, you know, we think that, you know, we own the money or the house. On the next hand, you know, ownership is a title, it's a concept. So what's the claim? The claim is that he has a family to look after, to house. The claim is that it's only fair that he gets to keep a house that he's paid a due amount for. It's only fair that Bradford and Bingley kind of look into their system and they try and find some kind of resolve to the dispute. Because like Bradford and Bingley wouldn't be losing anything. They can't expect to pay double for a house, not get the other half, and say that they're losing something. You can't sell something twice and lose it once. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but what I'm saying is like, I'm seeing these videos of police and bailiffs and supporters all kind of arguing about human rights and justice, but the claims we're making are kind of anti-intellectual, kind of trying to fight the law with their own procedures, saying that their procedures are wrong, when they take into consideration that their procedures are probably wrong. You know, white lies exist in law for a particular purpose. You have to understand that if the law was so clear-cut that we could just walk into court and say something to prove our innocence, that same thing could be used by evil people. Now, I know there's a lot of piety and people, superstition, saying, oh yeah, but all judges are corrupt, and you can't say that. It's like saying everybody in McDonald's spits in the burgers, but people still go. And they don't have to go. You know, so we're confronted with a situation. There's a way of making it better by staying with yourself, staying with your own claim. What is my claim? Because here it's like, you know, I'm losing my house, so I'm going to grab onto any bit of advice, any possibility I can to make myself stronger. When the full strength would be to say, look, if you take this house away from me, then you're hurting all of these people. And you have no claim to this house. You only have defect title. You know, and not to make the allegations that they're evil. We should stop presuming the other party to be evil. Just because they're following paper, following laws, following orders, we need a certain amount of logic, you know, understanding. These people are only doing their jobs, and it doesn't give them authority over us. But we can't just instantly presume authority because we call them our civil servants. Public, the word public, only it's a public. People think public is everybody who's free. No, that all of that public belongs to that nation. That nation peopled that public and became a polis. And that's why we've got police running round making sure the rules of the city-state run like on a ship with a captain. So I'm rambling on a little bit, I don't know if this made sense, but yeah. You know, I just think we need to like know what we're looking at. Same with the flat earth. You know, all the flat earth believers think that if we can wake up the world to the idea that the world is actually flat and that we're being lied to by NASA and the government, that everybody would wake up and we would then be free. But the people who are calling out this theory are not bothered at all whether the earth is round or flat. They couldn't care less, probably, in my opinion. The people who they don't care less whether it's flat or round. But it's like, let's take that as an argument to win. It's defaulting your own mission by trying to find something that replaces that mission. And there's so many surrogate aims, so many false things to listen to, so many charlatans, so many tricksters. And I believe in a society where everybody just sees everything so superstitiously and piously at first, because we get this stuff told as children, and we believe it, and then when we grow up we forget to stop believing in it. That's why Father Christmas, Santa Claus still exists, because we want to keep that nice belief for our children, because we actually believed that it was good, when in actual fact most of the kids, to my knowledge, know that Father Christmas doesn't exist, but you have to keep that a secret, otherwise you won't get the presents. You won't get the gifts, you know. So it's all a belief system that perpetuates itself. And this evil system that we're saying, you know, there seems to be so much proof that there is a system there of deception. Can't we turn it around and say, right, okay, it's a necessary deception, it's a good deception, that most of the things in this world that seem to be good in the light turn out to be not so good behind that light. So maybe with that superstition in mind, the good people know that the best way of hiding or putting the wisdom in for us to find, not hiding it, just revealing it for those who are not going to misuse it, to find it in places where we need to think better of it. To not think evil of it, because if we think evil of this, that's pretending to be evil, then we're going to miss the clarity. I can't say much more, except something just doesn't add up, and I've got my suspicions. But suspicions actually in the way of like a good suspicion, the suspicion that we've been provided with a layer of this system that we have to get through. We have to see the evil, we have to see the negative and overcome it in our minds, in ourselves, to stop jumping to conclusions that this is that, this is this. We have to come to the conclusion that the answer isn't going to be on the outside. You try and describe to me what a lemon tastes like, especially over the internet. That's how essential self-belief is. Because as soon as you can communicate something, doesn't matter how many people hear it, you've got a bad version of a lemon out there. Oh, it's bitter and yellow. A million different versions. So we just, most of the time it's hearsay, and we're just eating off the tree of, judgment. We're just making judgment. Poison tree doctoring, if you're into law, look into all that stuff. We're breaching the same laws as they are, seeing them as evil. Anyway, I'll leave it there. It's 21 minutes. Yeah. Just try really hard to look at things again without seeing it as evil. Alright, see you later.